Owning a golf course, 150 acres of manicured fairways, a clubhouse bar, a pro shop, and a community of members who show up every weekend, regardless of what the economy is doing. Here is the number that interrupts that image. The average 18-hole public golf course in the United States generates approximately $1.3 million in annual gross revenue. Its annual operating cost, before debt service, runs $1.1 million to $1.4 million. The margin between those two numbers is not a business. It is a rounding error, and that is before a single drought year, a single liability claim, or a single season of below-average play. Here is what this actually costs. An 18-hole public daily fee course in a mid-tier U.S. market sells for between $1 million and $5 million in 2026, based on National Golf Course Owners Association transaction data. That range sounds accessible. The entry cost is not the range. Land acquisition, $2 million in a mid-tier market for 120 to 180 acres. In land-constrained coastal or suburban markets, the same acreage trades for $5 million to $15 million because value is driven by residential rezoning potential, not green fee income. The seller understands this. Many buyers do not negotiate it correctly. Infrastructure at acquisition rarely reflects what is needed to operate competitively. Replacing a 1990s irrigation system with a modern GPS-controlled unit costs $500,000 to $1.5 million. This is not discretionary in Western states. It is required by municipal water permit renewals. The Golf Course Superintendents Association of America 2025 survey found that U.S. golf facilities reduced water use 31% between 2005 and 2024, largely through this infrastructure investment. Courses that deferred it are now facing permit deadlines they cannot pass. A fleet of 70 golf carts at $8,000 to $12,000 each is $560,000 to $840,000. Most acquired courses run aging fleets requiring replacement within 18 months. Clubhouse upgrades range from $150,000 for cosmetic refresh to $2 million for structural and ADA compliance work. Working capital reserve. The NENCOA recommends 12 months of fixed operating costs in liquid reserves at acquisition. At $1.2 million in annual fixed costs, that is $1.2 million in cash that cannot fund the purchase or infrastructure. Most first-time buyers do not hold it. Most who do not hold it face a cash crisis in their first off-season. Total realistic entry cost. Purchase price $2 million to $5 million. Infrastructure $750,000 to $2 million. Cart fleet $400,000 to $840,000. Clubhouse $200,000 to $800,000. Working capital $1.2 million. Total out-of-pocket before the first round. $4.5 million to $9.8 million. Golf course costs are structured differently from most businesses because the primary asset, turf, is a living biological system requiring continuous inputs regardless of revenue performance. Labor, 18 to 28 full-time equivalents in peak season. Annual payroll including employer taxes and benefits, $730,000 to $940,000 per year, representing 55% to 65% of gross revenue at the public course level. Turf maintenance, chemical inputs, water and labor attribution combined, run $220,000 to $360,000 per year. Water alone costs $40,000 to $120,000 depending on region. Neither line compresses during slow revenue periods. Equipment maintenance. Owning the fleet runs $40,000 to $80,000 annually in parts and service. Equipment in poor condition produces turf conditions that drive away customers faster than any pricing error. Insurance. Commercial general liability runs $40,000 to $80,000. Property insurance adds $20,000 to $45,000. Workers' compensation adds $15,000 to $30,000. Total, $75,000 to $155,000. Utilities, $60,000 to $120,000 annually. Winter utility bills do not compress proportionally to seasonal revenue reduction. Debt service. A $4 million acquisition financed at 7.5% over 20 years generates $380,000 in annual principal and interest. This payment runs regardless of weather or play volume. Annual operating cost before debt service, $1,485,000. With debt service, $1,865,000. The course must generate $1,865,000 annually, simply to remain solvent. Green fees on a mid-tier public course in 2026 range from $35 to $75 weekend and $50 to $100 weekend. A course charging $55 average, running 25,000 rounds annually across 200 to 280 playable days, generates $1,375,000 in green fee revenue. Cart fees bundled at $15 per rider, 70% cart rate, $262,500. Food and beverage, $150,000. Pro shop and range, $75,000 to $180,000. Total gross revenue, approximately $1,942,500. Subtract operating costs of $1,485,000. Operating income before debt service of $457,500 to $782,500. Subtract debt service of $380,000. Net income of $77,500 to $402,500. Return on invested capital of $4.5 million to $9.8 million. Approximately 1% to 9% depending on leverage and revenue volume. The high end requires everything to work simultaneously for years without disruption. That margin exists in a narrow operating band. Reduce rounds played by 15%, a prolonged wet spring, a drought summer, one new competitor, and operating income disappears entirely. What removes the margin is not a rare event. Golf revenue is entirely weather dependent. A public course in northern markets generates approximately 60% of annual revenue between May and September. 4 consecutive wet weekends in May eliminate $40,000 to $80,000 in green fees that cannot be recovered. The crew still worked, insurance still billed, debt service still came due. In western markets, drought is the mechanism. During California's 2013 to 2015 drought, both San Diego and Los Angeles imposed 15% mandatory water use reductions on golf courses. The city of Santa Cruz imposed a 28% cutback. Courses that could not reduce turf quality sufficiently, while maintaining playable conditions, faced player defection they could not recover from. Water costs in Western markets now run $80,000 to $250,000 annually. A mandatory 25% reduction does not save $25,000. It triggers customer loss worth 5 times that in foregone green fee revenue. Roddy Ranch Golf Club in Antioch, California, a well-regarded regional facility, closed permanently after the 2015 drought restrictions made the operation financially impossible. This was not mismanagement. It was the intersection of water cost and water availability with a fixed-cost business structure that had no adjustment mechanism. Weather risk and water risk are external. The case study that defines golf course financial failure at institutional scale involves a decision that looked intelligent the day the financing closed. American Golf Corporation was, at its peak in the 1990s, the largest golf course management and ownership company in the United States, operating more than 300 courses nationally. The roll-up model acquired courses at leverage, centralized management, and projected returns across a portfolio that would smooth individual course demand variability. The model required golf participation to remain stable or grow. Golf participation in the United States peaked at approximately 30 million players in 2003, per National Golf Foundation data. Between 2003 and 2014, that number fell to approximately 24 million, a 20% decline in the demand base while supply had expanded to serve peak demand. American Golf Corporation filed for bankruptcy protection in 2001. Revenue fell as courses across the portfolio experienced declining rounds. Fixed costs, debt service, maintenance crews, insurance, did not compress with revenue. Properties that were marginal at peak demand became insolvent below peak demand. This was not bad course management. The fairways were maintained. This was industry structure, a fixed-cost land business financed with leverage against a discretionary consumer activity with secular participation risk. When participation declined, the model had no adjustment mechanism. The debt came due regardless. The cost that never appears in acquisition projections is deferred capital, the accumulated infrastructure replacement backlog the previous owner postponed, absorbed by the buyer immediately after closing. The industry standard capital reserve is $60,000 to $100,000 per year for an 18-hole facility. Most owner-operated courses, running on thin margins, do not fund this reserve. The mower runs past its useful life. The irrigation controller is patched rather than replaced. Here is what a profitable-looking acquisition becomes once deferred capital surfaces. A buyer acquires a course at $2.5 million, showing $400,000 in operating income. Within 18 months, fairway mower failure, $85,000 replacement from operating cash, irrigation controller failure mid-season, $180,000 emergency replacement, cart battery replacement cycle on 40 units, $320,000, partially funded from the working capital reserve. The $400,000 in operating income the buyer purchased is consumed by capital the previous owner deferred. The operating income continues on the P&L. The cash is gone. There is another cost growing faster than any other line item, not from the course or its equipment. It arrives from the customers who visit it. Liability exposure from on-course incidents is the fastest-growing financial risk in golf course operations. A golf ball traveling at 120 miles per hour is a projectile. Courts have expanded what constitutes a foreseeable hazard to include inadequate hole separation, insufficient netting, and failure to warn of known hazardous conditions. A single traumatic injury claim, permanent vision loss from an errant shot, carries a settlement range of $500,000 to $3 million. A fatality generates wrongful death claims exceeding $5 million. Commercial general liability policies carry per-occurrence limits of $1 million to $2 million, limits set a decade ago that have not kept pace with verdict inflation. The gap between a $1 million policy limit and a $2.5 million verdict is $1.5 million absorbed personally by the owner. Umbrella policies are available, $15,000 to $40,000 annually above primary premiums, but they require a deliberate coverage decision before an incident, not after. Slip-and-fall claims on cart paths and clubhouse floors average $75,000 to $200,000 per incident in settlement. A high-volume public facility experiencing 2 to 3 such claims per year faces $150,000 to $600,000 in annual claims activity before a single green fee is collected. This can end the business in a single event that exceeds coverage limits. What gets better at scale? Purchasing power on turf inputs improves materially above 3 facilities. Volume contracts with chemical suppliers generate 15% to 25% discounts. Staff flexibility improves across proximate properties, reducing year-round payroll per course. The private club model, $40,000 initiation fees, $8,000 annual dues, 350 members, generates $2.8 million in annual dues revenue that is independent of weather and play volume. What gets harder? Regional management infrastructure adds $120,000 to $200,000 in overhead. Environmental compliance, stormwater permits, water use permits, chemical storage compliance, scales with property count and requires dedicated staff. Private club member litigation during ownership changes or financial distress has generated $500,000 to $2 million per incident in documented cases. At a certain size, this is a completely different business. A 12-course regional operator is a property management company, a hospitality operator, and an environmental compliance organization that also cuts grass. Optimistic. Owner acquires an 18-hole course in a Sunbelt market for $3.5 million. Infrastructure is current. Financing, $2.5 million at 7.5% over 20 years. Debt service, $237,000. Working capital reserve, $1.2 million maintained. First year, 28,000 rounds, at $58 average, $1,624,000 green fee revenue. Cart revenue, $302,000. Food, beverage, pro shop, range, $455,000. Operating cost before debt service, $1,485,000. Operating income, $896,000. After debt service, $659,000 net. Return on $4.7 million invested, 14%. Realistic. In year 2, a competitor opens 3 miles away with $10 lower average green fees. Rounds fall 16% to $23,500. A cart path slip and fall generates a $185,000 settlement, plus plus $62,000 in legal defense costs. Primary fairway mower fails, $88,000 emergency replacement from working capital. Revised revenue, $1,995,000. Unplanned cash outflows, $335,000. Net income after debt service, $175,000. Return on invested capital, 3.7%. Working capital reserve falls from $1.2 million to $865,000, below NCOA recommended minimum. The difference between those two scenarios is a competitor opening, a slip and fall, and an aging mower. None of these are exotic disasters. All three happen to someone in this industry every week. The National Golf Foundation reported that golf course closures in 2024 reached their lowest level since 2004, approximately 90 18-hole equivalent closures nationwide. The stabilization reflects genuine demand improvement. The structural financial challenges have not changed. The primary cause of golf course failure is entry leverage set against stabilized cash flow without margin for disruption. Courses that close are disproportionately acquired by buyers who prioritized purchase price negotiation over working capital adequacy and deferred capital assessment. 5 structural habits of survivors. No motivational language, only specifics. 1. They commissioned a full agronomic audit and equipment appraisal before closing, separate from the standard real estate inspection. Cost, $8,000 to $20,000. The same discoveries post-closing cost, multiples more. 2. They maintained a capital reserve of $80,000 to $100,000 per year in a dedicated account used exclusively for equipment replacement, funded before owner distributions were taken. 3. They diversified revenue beyond green fees within 2 years. Events, instruction programs, range memberships, food and beverage offerings that generate revenue on non-play days. A course generating 30% of revenue from events survives a poor weather season. A course generating 90% from green fees does not. 4. They reviewed and increased liability coverage, adding a minimum $3 million umbrella policy above the primary commercial general liability limit before the first public round. The annual cost is $15,000 to $40,000. An uninsured verdict above the primary limit can exceed the entire purchase price of the course. 5. They mapped every competing course within 15 miles before acquisition and built a competitive response plan before a new entrant activated. Courses that discovered a competitor had opened only after seeing declining rounds had already lost the positioning window. The image is 150 acres of managed fairways. The reality is $1.865 million in annual costs, a margin that disappears in a wet spring, and a liability structure where one slip-and-fall settlement consumes an entire year of operating income. Golf course ownership is a land business pretending to be a leisure business. The land wins most arguments,